Hello everyone, it's another week and this is another episode of the podcast of interest to no one. It's been another busy week, but filled mostly with boring, mundane tasks that aren't worth getting into. Clean the garage like I've been talking about for a couple weeks. Pretty happy about that. The highlight, I guess, would be last night when we went and saw Mark Maron do stand-up. I've been listening to the WTF podcast for almost 2 years, and Maureen and I both saw him perform at Bonnaroo last summer, so we're both fans. It was actually my first time in a comedy club, and the show was great, so overall I give the evening a big thumbs up, and we'll definitely go see him next time he comes to town. I finished the intros for the beer show and the movie show, and I'm pretty happy with how those turned out. All that leaves is the yard show, which I'm still brainstorming ideas for. Speaking of the beer show and all the other shows I mentioned a few weeks ago, I've decided to push back the start date on those until I can get a little more prep work done on them. See, I thought I could just launch into each of those shows like I did this one and make it up as I go along and add the more professional elements like music and graphics as I went along, but I kind of quickly realized that if I didn't start out strong, I'd never get any of those elements done. I've also decided that even though the nature of the podcast of interest to no one dictates I write and record it on the same week that it airs, in fact sometimes the same day that it airs, I'd be much better off pre-recording a bunch of episodes of those other shows so I can stay a few weeks ahead. So anyway, those shows will come along when they come along, but when I do start them up, hopefully they'll be a lot more consistent and of higher quality than if I just started desperately cranking them out right now. In the meantime, let's get into this week's tutorial, a quick and easy guide to building workbenches for your garage. Now, I actually built these a while ago, so I don't have photos and video of the actual process, but I've thrown together some visual aids that should help. What's nice about this project is that the benches are quick and easy to build, but there's a lot of room for customization. For instance, the bench I saw that I actually based mine off of was 4 feet wide by 3 feet deep. But I needed to make mine a lot thinner, so mine are actually 5 feet long by 2 feet deep, and the conversion was no trouble at all. So let's get started. This project requires a saw, a drill, and some screws, and that's pretty much it. I used 2.5 inch number 8 screws for most of it, and 1.25 inch number 8 screws for the plywood. I also recommend using the star drive screws. Pull some out here. See, right there? If you can get your hands on some, but it's no big deal if you can't. Now, another thing I'll go ahead and point out now, because it'll probably come up in pictures later on, is that I use boards left over from another project. If I bought wood just for this project, then the support beams in the middle of each shelf would have been 2x4s. Because of the limitations of what I had on hand though, I used 2x6s in those spots and just turned them horizontal. So I'm going to instruct you on how to use 2x4s in that spot, which means you're going to need 30.5 feet of 2x4s and 12 feet of 2x6s. You'll also need one 4-foot by 8-foot piece of 1/2 inch thick plywood. Okay, so start by cutting the wood to size. You'll need 6 21-inch long pieces of 2x4, 4 5-foot long pieces of 2x4, and 4 3-foot long pieces of 2x6. Be especially careful measuring and cutting the 2x6s because these are going to be the legs of your workbench, and if they're not even, then your table's going to wobble. Take your piece of plywood and cut out 2 pieces that are 5 feet long and 2 feet wide. The piece that will be your tabletop is fine, but you'll need to cut out the corners of the lower shelf to make room for your table legs. We'll be aligning the 2x6 legs perpendicular to the wall, so starting from the front of your piece of plywood, measure 7 inches back up the left side and make a mark. Now measure 3 inches in from that and make another mark. This will be the inside corner of your leg. Draw a line back to the original mark on the left side, and then another perpendicular line back to the front side. Repeat this in the other 3 corners and cut them out. Now it's time to start assembling everything. Lay 2 of your 2x6s parallel on the ground. Now lay 2 of your 21-inch 2x4s across them. The outside edge of your 2x6s should line up with the ends of your 2x4s. Line up your top 2x4 with the top of your 2x6s and make sure they're even. I wanted the bottom shelf of my bench to be about a foot off the floor, and if you do too, make sure that the top of your lower 2x4 is 12 inches from the bottom of the 2x6s. Using your long screws, the 2.5 inch ones, screw the 2x4s into the 2x6s. I recommend using 3 screws in a triangular pattern in each spot. Repeat this process with your other pair of 2x6s and 2 more 21-inch long 2x4s. The 2 sides of your workbench are now complete. Now lay both of these pieces on their side parallel to each other, almost 5 feet apart. Take 2 of your 5-foot long 2x4s and lay them across the legs and align them so that they're even with the 21-inch 2x4s. These 5-foot 2x4s are going to be the front and back of your table. The ends should line up with the outside edges of the 21-inch 2x4s. Once everything is lined up, screw the 5-foot pieces into the legs. When making your triangular pattern, make sure 2 of the screws go into the 2x6 and 1 of them goes in the 2x4. Now carefully flip the whole thing over so the 5-foot 2x4s are on the ground, and repeat the last 2 steps with your 2 remaining 5-foot lengths of 2x4. The next step is to add support braces to the middle of each shelf. Again, for the record, I'm assuming that you're using 21-inch long pieces of 2x4 for these braces and not the 2x6s like I did. Measure 30 inches from the end of the 5-foot 2x4 to find the middle of the board and make a mark. Mark the opposite 5-foot 2x4 the same way, and then slide one of your 2 remaining 21-inch 2x4s between the 2 5-foot boards and center it on the marks you just made. The most important part is to make sure that the top of your brace is even with the top of your 5-foot sides. If it's higher, the table will have a bow in the middle. If it's too low, then it won't hold any weight and it'll be completely useless. Use 2 screws, one near the top and one near the bottom, to secure your brace in place. Do the same on the other side, and then repeat the whole thing with your final 21-inch piece of 2x4 and make the brace for the other shelf. The final step is to attach your plywood shelves. Install the bottom shelf first because you'll have to go through the top in order to fit it in there. First, stand the bench upright. Now come through the opening in the top and feed the shelf with the cutout corners into place. It's a tight fit and may take a little finagling. You may even have to pull it out and shave a little more off the corners that you already cut out. Eventually though, you should be able to fit it into place. Since the plywood is much thinner, you can attach it with your shorter 1 1/4 inch screws. Use 1 in each of the 8 corners and 2 in the middle at each end of your brace. The tabletop of course will be much easier since it doesn't have to be wedged into place. Just line it up so all your sides are even and use your short screws to attach it. 1 in each quarter and then 1 in the middle at each end of the brace. And that's it! That's your basic workbench. Lots of extra space and very strong. If you want a smooth work surface, you can always try sticking on some laminate tiles or nailing a piece of hardboard on top of your plywood. Like I said, this project is very easy to customize for your specific needs, so feel free to experiment. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you try it, feel free to email me at the address below and let me know how it went, and maybe even send me some pics if you want. I'll be back with another project next week, and remember to keep an eye out for some new shows in the near future. So take it easy, and I will see you again on this show next week.